Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're going to look at something pretty simple, but surprisingly powerful, and with pretty far-reaching impact.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's this simple yet powerful thing?
It's kindness. Like plain old, simple kindness. We've got all sorts of cool stuff to dig into today.
Oh, cool. What kind of stuff?
Well, we've got historical anecdotes, insights from psychology, even some advice from the master of human connection himself, Dale Carnegie.
Dale Carnegie, huh? That's quite a range.
I know, right? And the really interesting thing is that whether we're talking about personal relationships, professional success, or even just our own happiness, it seems like those small acts of appreciation can really make a difference. Big time.
You know, it's true. It's easy to just think of kindness as being nice, but when you really start to look at it, you realize that it's so much more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like this kind of fundamental driver of human connection and motivation.
Exactly.
To kick things off, how about we dive into a story that really blew me away when I first came across it?
Sounds good to me. Hit me with it.
Ever heard of Tough Guy Crozier?
The name rings a bell, but I can't say I remember the specifics.
All right, so picture this. New York City, 1931. Crozier, this guy, totally notorious for being, well, a tough guy, ends up in a standoff with the police, barricades himself in his apartment, refuses to come out.
Talk about a classic tough guy move.
Right, but here's where things take a turn. While he's holed up there, he writes a letter. And in that letter, he shows this, unexpected vulnerable side, this deep longing for connection.
Oh, wow. So there was more to him than met the eye.
Totally. He even writes, "Underneath my tough exterior, there's a heart that would do nobody any harm."
It's like a glimpse into the complexity of human nature, isn't it?
Exactly. Even the toughest looking guys out there, they still crave that connection.
You know, it really makes you think. We often make these assumptions about people based on how they appear on the surface, but underneath it all, we all share that basic need to feel seen and appreciated.
It's so true, and you know what? That need starts early. There's this story about a little boy whose father bought him a calf, and the boy is obviously thrilled, but he goes above and beyond, talking to the calf, petting it, always telling it how much he appreciates it.
That's sweet. And it's interesting how kids seem to intuitively understand the power of positive reinforcement. It's like he wasn't just taking care of the calf, he was really nurturing their bond by constantly expressing his appreciation. Makes you think, how often do we extend that same level of genuine appreciation to the people in our own lives?
That's a really good question. Speaking of appreciating people, let's shift gears and look at the workplace. There's this story about a janitor named Chris who felt completely invisible, like his work didn't matter to anyone.
It's sad, but that feeling of being unseen, undervalued, it's something that a lot of people experience, especially those in jobs that don't always get the recognition they deserve.
Exactly. But then someone at work started simply asking Chris about his day, taking a genuine interest in his work.
Just acknowledging him as a person.
Right. And the change in Chris was incredible. He became more engaged, more productive. His whole attitude shifted. It's like that simple act of acknowledgement really unlocked something in him.
It's a great example of how even small gestures of appreciation can have a huge impact on someone's motivation and sense of self-worth.
So it's like recognition is the secret weapon for boosting morale. But what happens when you go in the opposite direction, like constant negativity? There's this story about a man whose wife, probably meaning well, seemed to only ever focus on his flaws, every day pointing out what he was doing wrong. It really chipped away at his confidence.
Makes sense. It's like death by a thousand cuts. Not just about criticism, it's about the whole emotional climate that's being created.
Yeah.
And constantly focusing on the negative can be incredibly damaging to a person's self-esteem.
And then there's this contrasting story about Pam Dunham and her son. She made a conscious effort to praise him, to look for those little things to appreciate, and it created this incredibly loving and supportive environment.
It shows how important it is to create a culture of appreciation, both at home and at work. It's about recognizing the good, celebrating achievements, focusing on strengths. And by doing that, you create an environment where people feel encouraged to grow.
It makes such a difference. Okay, get ready for this next one. It's a little out there.
Okay, lay it on me.
There's this woman, Mrs. Esposito, who had this whole system, a preferred list.
A preferred list, what's that?
Basically, if you did something nice for her, you got added to this list, and being on the list meant you got special treatment. Favors, perks, all that. It was a whole elaborate system. Maybe a little eccentric, but...
But it speaks to something, doesn't it?
Totally. It might be an extreme example, but it highlights that human desire to feel valued, to be recognized for what we do. It's like she turned appreciation into a game.
It's fascinating how that need for recognition can be
Mhm.
so powerful.
And you know who was a master at understanding these human motivations? Dale Carnegie.
Mm.
He talked about this principle of, I love this phrase, arousing in the other person an eager want.
It sounds like a magic spell.
Right, but basically it's about figuring out what the other person wants and using that as a way to achieve what you want.
So it's not about manipulation. It's about understanding their needs and desires and finding that common ground.
Exactly. He had this great example about a man trying to buy a bed for his dog. Instead of focusing on the bed's features, he zoomed in on the salesman's love of dogs. He found that shared passion, and boom, sale closed.
I love that. It's a reminder that sometimes appealing to someone's interests is way more effective than pushing your own agenda. It's about making that connection.
And it seems like this idea of shifting focus away from ourselves and toward others is key. There's another story about a speaker who was told point blank that his lectures were boring.
Ouch. That's gotta sting.
I know, right? But instead of getting defensive, he really took it to heart.
Yeah.
He stopped trying to just deliver information and started thinking about how to engage his audience, asking questions, making eye contact, really connecting with them.
It's about understanding their needs, right?
Yeah.
Not just focusing on your own desire to talk.
And the result was his lectures became captivating.
That's a perfect example of how putting Carnegie's principle into action can lead to real transformation.
And you know who else said something similar? This really tough editor, Professor Overstreet. He told Dale Carnegie that a good fiction writer has to be interested in people, not just as a writing technique, but as a way of life.
So cultivating that genuine curiosity about others, approaching every interaction with empathy, that's key. And it's not just for writers, it's for everyone.
It's like that active listening we always hear about, but taken to a whole new level. And speaking of recognizing the good in people, we can't forget Charles Schwab. He was famous for his generosity with praise, especially towards his mill manager. He truly believed this guy was doing an exceptional job.
It's about building a strong team, creating loyalty, recognizing and rewarding good work. This is so fundamental.
Then there's William B. Steinkrat. He was a stockbroker in New York, and he made a point every single day to smile at his wife and tell her how much he appreciated her. It might seem like a small thing, but over time, those little gestures really build up.
It shows how small, consistent acts of kindness can make a big difference in the long run. It's not about grand gestures, it's about those little things we do every day.
And here's the last story for this part. It's a little morbid, but thought-provoking. Have you ever heard of the town nicknamed the Two-Funeral Town?
Two-Funeral Town. I can't say I have. Why was it called that?
So it was this town in Rockland County. People there only really attended two kinds of funerals.
Okay, that sounds kind of ominous. What were the two kinds?
The first was for grumpy recluses, the kind of people who kept to themselves.
Right, I get it. And the second kind?
The second was for those who were beloved, people known for their kindness, their genuine interest in others.
I see. It's a powerful illustration of the kind of impact we have on the world, isn't it? It really makes you think about the legacy we leave behind.
Absolutely, it does make you think. And that's a wrap for part 1 of our deep dive into the power of kindness. We've seen how even small acts of appreciation can have a big impact, breaking down walls, boosting morale, even shaping the way people remember us. But there's so much more to explore. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll dig into even more stories and insights.
It's incredible how these little things, like a smile, a kind word, can have such a ripple effect. It reminds me of this story about a speaker who managed to pull off something pretty amazing just by shifting his focus.
Oh, I love those mindset shift stories. What happened?
So this speaker was exhausted before a big presentation, feeling drained, uninspired, worried he wouldn't be able to connect with the audience.
I've been there. It's tough when you feel like you're running on empty.
Right. But this guy, instead of giving in to that exhaustion, he did something really interesting. He shifted his focus, started thinking about how much his audience needed to hear what he had to say. He pictured them leaving feeling energized and inspired.
And that gave him the boost he needed.
Exactly. He found the energy to deliver a truly captivating speech.
That's pretty amazing. By focusing on the needs of others, he tapped into this hidden reserve. It's like that idea that the best way to cheer yourself up is to try and cheer someone else up.
I like that connection. It shows how our internal state can be so influenced by what we choose to focus on externally.
So simple, but so powerful.
It really is.
It makes you think about how easy it is to get stuck in our own heads, especially when we're feeling down. But this story is a good reminder that we have the power to choose where we direct our attention.
We do. It's about remembering that we're all connected. Our actions, our attitudes, they have an impact on those around us. And by focusing on their well-being, we often end up benefiting ourselves in ways we never expected.
Okay, shifting gears a bit, this next story is about a World War I veteran who felt totally ignored by his fellow veterans. They just weren't interested in what he had to say. It really left him feeling isolated and disconnected.
That feeling of isolation can be so painful, especially for someone who has shared such profound experiences, often traumatic ones. It's like they're searching for that sense of camaraderie, that understanding, but they just can't seem to bridge the gap.
It makes you wonder, why couldn't he connect with them? What was missing?
Well, it seems like he was so focused on sharing his own stories, his own experiences, that he wasn't really making space for theirs, trying to connect through talking, but not through listening.
So it was a communication breakdown.
Yeah, you could say that. But then he had this realization. He stopped trying to force his stories on them and started asking about their experiences, their interests, their families.
And that's when things changed.
That's when he finally got their attention and even earned their appreciation by simply shifting from talking to listening.
Such a simple shift, but it made all the difference. It's a great reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is just be present, listen with genuine interest. It's like that saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
That's a great way to put it. It's about valuing their perspective, their experiences, creating that space for genuine dialogue and connection.
Okay, ready for some ancient wisdom.
Hit me with it.
This story is about Lao Tse, the Chinese philosopher. He had this advice for rulers. He said, place yourself behind others.
That's an interesting concept. It almost sounds like the modern idea of servant leadership, putting the needs of others before your own.
Exactly. And there's a great example of this in action. It's about a hotel manager who went above and beyond to accommodate a really challenging guest.
Oh, I've dealt with my fair share of those. What happened?
This guest was being incredibly demanding, even rude to the staff. Most people would have been tempted to put him in his place, but this manager, he stayed calm. He listened to the guest's complaints and found a way to resolve the situation while still making the guest feel heard and respected.
It sounds like he chose collaboration over conflict.
Exactly. And in the end, it worked out for everyone involved.
Sometimes that humble, service-oriented approach can be the most effective, especially in those situations where we're tempted to assert our authority.
Okay, how about a little story about Silent Cal? That's President Calvin Coolidge. He was known for being pretty reserved.
I can only imagine. Silent Cal. What happened?
Well, one time he was at a dinner, seated next to this very attractive young woman, and she was determined to get him talking.
Sounds like a challenge.
She told him she'd made a bet with her friends that she could get him to say more than 2 words.
And what did he say?
You lose.
That's great. He didn't let himself get pulled into her game. He stayed true to himself, even in a situation where he might have felt pressure to be more outgoing.
It's a good reminder that it's okay to be yourself, even when others are trying to push you outside your comfort zone.
Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just be authentic.
Absolutely. Okay, speaking of challenging situations, how about this? An executive was facing a huge rent increase for his office space.
Oof, that's never fun. What did he do?
He did his research, gathered data on comparable rents in the area, and then he presented his findings to the building manager, calmly, rationally, appealing to his sense of fairness, sticking to the facts and figures.
So he stayed cool under pressure.
He did. He didn't get angry, didn't make threats. He just laid out the facts, and guess what? It worked. The manager agreed to a much more reasonable increase.
It's a classic case of you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. Sometimes a little bit of empathy can go a long way.
It really can. All right, last story before we move on to our final takeaway. This one's about a woman who was constantly complaining about her life. Nothing seemed to go right for her.
We all know people like that. It's like they get stuck in a cycle of negativity.
It's like they're wearing these negativity glasses that filter out all the good.
Exactly. But this woman had a neighbor who suggested something pretty simple but powerful. She encouraged her to start focusing on the positive things in her life, no matter how small.
Ah, the power of gratitude.
That's it. And it worked wonders. Her whole outlook changed. She started seeing opportunities instead of obstacles.
It's amazing how much our perspective can influence our reality. It's like that saying, what you focus on expands.
It's true. The more we practice gratitude, the more natural it becomes. It's like exercising a muscle, but for happiness.
I love that. A happiness muscle. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've heard stories about tough guys, philosophers, everyday heroes. But what's the takeaway? Why does all of this matter?
These stories remind us that genuine kindness and appreciation are more than just niceties. They have a real impact on our relationships, our work, even how we feel about ourselves.
It's like we've been on this incredible journey discovering all these amazing insights about kindness.
And it really is remarkable how these ideas resonate no matter what time period or culture we're looking at. It seems like everyone's saying the same thing. Kindness matters.
It does. And it's not just about being superficially nice, is it?
No, not at all. It's about a deeper way of interacting with the world, approaching every interaction with a genuine desire to understand, to connect, to see the value in others.
So it sounds like we've maybe cracked the code to living a more fulfilling life, more meaningful life. But how do we actually put all this into practice?
Well, I have a challenge for our listeners. Think of someone you interact with on a regular basis.
Anyone in particular?
It could be anyone, a coworker, a friend, a family member, even the barista who makes your coffee every morning.
Okay, I've got someone in mind. What's next?
Now, take a moment to think about that person and see if you can identify something, one specific thing that you genuinely appreciate about them.
Like what?
It could be anything, their sense of humor, their work ethic, their kindness, whatever it is, something that really stands out to you.
Okay, I think I've got it. Now what?
Now, here's the challenge. Express that appreciation to them sincerely. Tell them what you admire about them, and then just observe what happens.
I love that. It's such a simple thing, but I bet it can have a big impact.
I think so, too. You might be surprised by the ripple effects you set in motion just by sharing a little bit of appreciation.
It's like planting a seed, right?
Exactly. A seed of kindness. And who knows what might grow from it.
This has been such an inspiring deep dive. And I think we can all benefit from being a little bit kinder, a little bit more appreciative in our daily lives.
I agree.
So until next time, keep exploring the depths of human connection. And remember, even the smallest acts of kindness can create ripples that extend far beyond ourselves.